You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 27th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio.
It's 2000 in Kyiv, 1900 in Rome, 1800 here in London and 1400 in Washington, D.C. That's the time on Monocle Radio, brought to you by Chanel Watches. Is the Anglo-French cavalry coming for Ukraine? Is the United States brain drain Europe's opportunity? And a whole new way you might have been annoying people without realising. I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Marie Leconte and Rachel Cunliffe will discuss the day's big stories, and our weekly letter from somewhere or other has a Senegalese stamp on it. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Rachel Cunliffe, Senior Associate Editor of The New Statesman, and by Marie Leconte, the political journalist and author. Hello to you both.
Hi.
Marie, you, it turns out, were in Paris last week when this show was being broadcast from Paris, and yet you weren't on it. That just seems poorly organised all round.
I know. I was there to visit family, which I know is really shocking coming from a French person going to France to see your relatives. But here we are.
But while you were in Paris, they did one of those weird things that Parisians do. Every year they have a vote on a thing.
Yes, I really enjoy it. So Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, started this a few years ago. So once a year, Parisians get to vote on a Paris-only referendum. So this year was, should we rewild and pedestrianise 500 streets across Paris? Parisians said yes, but I think that the more whimsical side is that all the arrondissements, so the districts, are allowed to vote on their own mini referendum if they want to. And they don't always do it every year. But yeah, this year my favourite one was the 19th arrondissement, who voted to set up a pet memorial in a park in the arrondissement. Just quite charming.
How charming / whimsical are you allowed get? Is the sky the limit on this stuff?
I think, again, it's still quite new. It's only 3 years old, I think, the idea of the referendum. So I think things could actually get quite whimsical. There was something about using, I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it sounded really woo-woo, of sort of like using digital things to make the world more welcoming in like a specific arrondissement. I don't even know what that means. I don't even know if I vote yes or no.
Rachel, uncommon among this table, you have not recently been to Paris, but you have been to Berlin.
I have been to Berlin, yes. It was my first time ever visiting Berlin, which is kind of interesting in itself because that is where historically my family are from. It was also my first time entering Germany on my German passport that I reclaimed, I guess, in 2019. And I did that bit at the immigration passport queue where I left my husband in the non-EU queue so I could go through the German one, and then got spoken to in German and was unable to respond. So that was embarrassing.
See, I do, when going to Germany, have to stand in the queue for foreign riffraff because I am an Australian passport holder, but I do often get spoken to in German because they see my surname and make assumptions, and I have to explain that my clearly German forebears decamped to South Australia some while ago now, and my command of the language is not what it might be.
So I don't have that problem because I don't have a German surname, but my mother, who has been to Germany on her newly reclaimed German passport, does, and similarly her German is, well, she knows enough to get through immigration. But it was a really fun trip. It was lots of Cold War history, and for anyone who is listening from Berlin or is planning a trip anytime soon, can I recommend the Spy Museum, where, as well as having the world's tiniest cameras, the kind of cameras that you can hide in a pen or a lipstick or anything like that, they also have an actual laser maze that you can go through to pretend you are a real spy. We did it 3 times. I failed every time.
Well, we are actually going to start in Paris, and with the latest iteration of what has seemed like a sort of rolling emergency summit on Ukraine ever since US Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the Munich Security Conference in February and told America's assembled European allies that they were a bunch of effete wine-slurping accordionists who would all be speaking German if it wasn't for him, or words to that effect. Today's headline is that French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that Ukraine's European allies, led by France France and the United Kingdom will deploy what he called a reassurance force to police any ceasefire in Ukraine. He made it clear that neither Russia's nor the United States' permission would be necessary. Murray, first of all, President Macron does not lack a history of somewhat vainglorious pronouncements that he may not have thought all the way through. How seriously should we take this one?
7 out of 10 serious, I would say.
Okay, 7 Macrons.
No, but I think he's got, I don't know, I thought it was quite interesting, when he first got elected, he clearly thought, and then I shall become king of Europe, naturally, and that didn't quite work, especially, I think, in his first kind of term. I think the EU kind of looked at him, Merkel, etc., and went, who are you, what is this? But he has, to be fair to him, which I rarely am, over the past few years, I do think he has established himself as a very, very powerful voice in Brussels, and obviously you've got Keir Starmer, just outside the EU, kind of, working really closely with him. And so, I would say I think that was probably quite an important announcement, and especially the point about saying, and actually we don't really care that we're announcing this, we're not waiting for, Donald Trump or whoever to agree that is the thing the EU will do. So, I do think it was reasonably interesting as a development. I
mean, and looking at it from the British perspective, Rachel, this is all potentially starting to get a bit real, isn't it?
Very real. The conversations are about what forces, what that could look like. Are we talking boots on the ground? Are we talking some kind of air defence in some way? There's still very much on the UK side, at least, for whatever Macron may have said today. The UK really wants the US's buy-in on this, and the language coming out of Downing Street is that they're working very closely with the White House, and some kind of US backstop, US air defence is very much part of it. But I think there is a dawning realisation, especially after those messages that we saw earlier this week, that the US cannot be relied upon. It's interesting what Marie said about Macron and his kind of, this has been his not his mission for a while. I'm not suggesting that he was hoping that there would be some kind of European security crisis, but he has been a supporter of some kind of European army defence force long before it was cool, as they say. And it's interesting to see after decades of gridlock with the EU and the UK as well, how quickly things have moved in a few months. Suddenly Europe has got its act together and gone, yeah, we do actually need this. Although I note, and I kind of wanted to ask Marie about this as the representative of her country, why it is that as part of this European-wide defence force, we are still going to end up talking about fishing rights for French fishermen in British waters. Why is it still about fish?
So how far back do you want me to say? Because I think 1066 or is that? Yeah. How much, Andrew? How much time do we have?
Yeah. First, the Earth cooled. Yeah.
I'm not sure. No, I mean, I could have asked you the same question. No, I do think fishing has remained, and I've seen the headlines, and I mean, you covered Brexit as well, and I don't know about you, but it very much felt like some sort of horrible ex-boyfriend who you really thought, had moved halfway across the world, and somehow you bump into him on your own street, and it's like, no, come on, not fishing again, not the quotas. But no, I'm not an expert in this because I don't want to be, so I'm not sure. But it is quite disappointing, I think, and it is mostly annoyingly coming from the French side as well, I think, because even was it recently, I think, a Starmer and Macron meeting where, the Downing Street side said, this is brilliant, and we're working very closely together on defence, on Ukraine, on supporting Zelensky, etc. And the French Élysée source, I think, did say something along the lines of, yeah, I mean, it's fine. Which was, yes, again, I would say frustrating. But
I just want to go back, Murray, to that point you made about Macron seeing the French president's role and his personally as being the sort of king of Europe. Especially now, especially since the fact of Brexit, it's not an unreasonable position. France, as has been discussed before on this programme, is now the only country which is EU, NATO and on the P5 of the Security Council. Do you get the sense, though, given the traditionally, to put it mildly, ambivalent relationship between the French people and their president, that the actual French voter is on board for the idea of Macron or whoever may succeed him being king or queen of Europe?
I think it's actually working out reasonably well for him, and I'm not going to pretend people adore him now, but you will have noticed the government hasn't fallen in weeks now, which has been shocking. So I do think if you look at the polling, people, I think, are standing to an extent behind Macron on this, but because like everyone else, I think, in Europe, they are worried about Putin and they do want to support Ukraine, and I think they do see that France needs to play quite a big role in this, and obviously, France never had the kind of Brexit or, sort of like crisis of identity, but, not unlike Britain, it did have the kind of like post-colonial, slightly existential, what's our place in the world? We used to be so large and powerful and now what are we, etc. thing. So I do think that, similar to Britain, there's a sense of going, oh, well, we must sometimes rise up to the occasion. And actually, to be fair to him, twice in one show, I think Macron is quite good at that. Like, he's quite good at the kind of big picture, slightly, as I say, poetic. I'm not sure it's exactly the right word, but you know what I mean. The big moments, the big things, and French people can see that.
I mean, just finally on this one, Rachel, do you get the sense of similar messaging being floated by the government here in the United Kingdom? Because from the EU this week, we've seen the sort of announcement of what they're calling their preparedness union strategy, which now that I look at it is a deeply unfortunate acronym. But especially they're asking all European citizens to have about their abode a 72-hour survival kit. I mean, if the government here announced that, do you think it would meet with a positive and cooperative response?
Have you met people from this country? Oh,
Several.
My goodness. The idea of the UK government inviting people to go out and be preppers, to panic buy, to stockpile batteries and candles and food and water supplies for 72 hours, we would absolutely love it. And to make a sort of more serious point, Macron has had a slight bounce in his popularity as a result of events in the last few months. So has Keir Starmer. Mm-hmm. Pretty rocky week for the government this week in terms of the spring statement, but the defence element of it, the idea that we need to make tough choices here in the UK because our national security is at stake. We've seen a polling bounce for Starmer and for the government as a result of that. So, if there's an opportunity for Starmer to be very stern on TV and tell everyone that it's their national duty to go and stockpile loo roll and batteries, I think the British people would absolutely be up for that.
Well, maintaining the theme of the world adjusting to the United States' apparent pivot towards authoritarian autarky, some sectors are beginning to perceive potential advantages. Some European universities are seeking to encourage a brain drain from the US, offering positions and placements specifically tailored to entice American academics who might prefer to work somewhere not governed by people who think that the best place for scientists is the ducking stool. Schools in France, the Netherlands and Belgium seem especially energetic in kicking the red carpet towards US-based boffins fearing the imminent application of pitchfork. Murray, is it actually imaginable that this is kind of what the Trumpists want? All these nerds, eggheads and Poindexters to clear off to Europe with their lab coats and scientific inquiry.
I mean, that's worrying, and I'd never quite seen it like that. But I don't believe they would go, oh, God, no, please don't go. No, please stay. We love you. No, I do think the real worry for the US, which I think several, scientists and academics have pointed out already, is that this is not just a case of, we've now gone past the point of, it's going to be, like a tough 4 years, but then, hopefully the Democrats will win again, and then things, can pick up where they left off. Like, you lose out on so much by losing, 4 years, and by having people again move away. That means you've got no one, getting more senior, no one teaching, no experts left to teach the people, etc. So I think you lose so much institutional memory by having people either not work or entirely leave the country. So I do think, again, using your framing, that is probably what they want, in that they are making just so much damage, and that damage will be very long-lasting, whatever happens, at the next election.
I mean, is there also a potential bonanza for non-American universities, Rachel, in attracting not just staff but students? We have, of course, seen some extraordinary scenes in the United States this week of, students plucked off the street by not terribly well-identified agents of the state who apparently have committed no crime worse than writing a mildly disobliging op-ed in a student newspaper.
Yeah, I think we get very used to trying not to be shocked by things that are going on in Trump 2.0. But this really is shocking. And I say that as somebody who has been made quite uncomfortable since the events of October 7th by some of the conversations going on in left-wing student campuses, and some of the rhetoric about Israel and about Jewish people has made me feel very uncomfortable. But the idea that writing an op-ed suddenly means that you can be seized off the street, handcuffed, taken to a location where your family and your lawyers have no idea where you are, and detained pretty much as long as they want to, even when you have a valid visa, on the basis that somebody in Washington didn't like something that you wrote, is horrifying. And regardless of the individual politics of it, if I was considering studying at an American university, or if I had a child or a family member who had got a place to study at a US university, I would be advising to maybe think again, because what we've learned from this is that legal immigration rights, having a valid visa, having a valid green card in some cases, is not a protection. And I'm not sure I would want to be in a country where personal liberty could just be switched off at whim like that. So I think you are going to see European students who perhaps, students from all over the world, but particularly European students who have the option of studying at European universities, thinking again, and academics too. It's a reversal of the trend that has been very much going in the other direction, because we know that US educational institutions can pay salaries that are so far above what academics could get here in the UK. But you also know that you're still going to have a job probably in a couple of days' time, even if the personnel in the White House decide that they don't like you.
Because academia as well, Mari, it's not just about the people who work in it and the people who study in it. I don't have off the top of my head the figure explaining what academic conferences are worth to the United States every year, but I suspect it is a very far from non-zero amount. And I do know just myself in my own immediate circle of people who have kind of abandoned plans to go to the United States, or are rethinking them, or have been invited to conferences and are thinking, actually, I might give that one a swerve.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think in terms of like both soft power and kind of, again, the broader just knowledge that you gain from all these events, like, I think the US will completely lose out. I'm not... I've gone in an incredibly short amount of time from, maybe I'll go back to the US soon. I spent 2 months there last year. Maybe I'll go back, see my friends, do some work too. I am not stepping a foot in that country, in the current circumstances. And I do have a working journalist visa, so I should be safe. And as you said, and we're kind of just swapping anecdotes here, but I do know lots of, journalists, academics, etc., who, again, even though technically they should be going to the US because that's something they do once, twice, 3 times a year for work, they're now going actually, no, and we're thinking of maybe like trying to see if we can do conferences in Canada, we can do conferences somewhere else. So yeah, they will lose out. And it's not clear again, and I think, we touched on that, the fact they're probably just quite childishly happy about the fact that, all the boffins are kind of, leaving and kind of staying away from the US. But financially, that is going to be a problem at some point. And I think, and I've seen several stories that show that the US budget is probably going to collapse in the next few months because they're just hemorrhaging money left, right and centre. So they will probably have to face up to that fact at some point.
I don't think they care. I really don't. I think that the attitude has been that the universities lean left, lean Democrat, and therefore things that damage the universities financially and also damage their status internationally, damage the cachet, damage their soft power, are good for this administration, which is really quite sad.
I mean, Rachel, just finally on this, do you perceive, because you were the one who brought the B word, i.e. Brexit, into the conversation earlier.
I'm so sorry.
But do you perceive something similar underpinning Trumpism as well? There is this extraordinary self-destructive nihilism at the heart of it, this idea, it doesn't matter if I've shot myself in my foot as long as I'm bleeding on your carpet.
I think there is, in both instances, an attitude of exceptionalism, British exceptionalism, American exceptionalism. Obviously, the thing we learnt about Brexit was that British exceptionalism maybe wasn't quite in the place that we thought it was. I think it's a bit different for the US, but I think that they really do have, the people in the White House at the moment do have a burn it all down attitude, and they think that they will be able to rebuild something that is, from their perspective, better from the destruction, which is quite terrifying.
Well, we turn now to the alleged etiquette-related irritant of the moment. Boffins at Harvard Business School and Imperial College London have identified a somewhat malevolent conversational gambit they have defined as boomerasking. The word is a portmanteau of boomerang, the self-returning Indigenous Australian utensil, and asking. To boomerask is to pose what appears to be a genuine question about someone else, which is, in fact, a setup by the boomerasker to talk about themselves. Mari, have you, within the last few years, written a book about Australian rules football, which is still available in all good stores?
Oh my God, I have, and let me tell you in exquisite detail.
Is this a thing, do we think? Boomerasking?
No, it's not. I think it's just called making conversation. If you're talking to someone, you may wish to talk, about topics that you're interested in, and, hopefully the other person is interested in as well. And obviously I think, but like any other question of etiquette, I guess, if it's especially, especially shameless, then it can be annoying. Like, I'm not citing any examples, recent or otherwise. But no, otherwise, I was reading about it before the show, and I was like, no, that's just called talking to someone. That's not. Like, what else are you meant to do? Ask questions and obviously you can, as long as you mix it up with questions you ask because you genuinely just want to know the answer, then surely it's fine. I don't know, I'm really struggling. Or maybe I'm a boomerasker and I've not realised this entire time that's...
Well, yeah. See, Rachel, this was the thing that kind of gnawed at me somewhat, in that, like Mari, I just sort of thought, is this a thing? I'm not aware that this is a thing. But often, if you are not aware that something is a thing, is it perhaps because it's a thing you've been doing?
See, I have such anxiety about this because I hate networking. I mean, I've never met anyone who says they like networking. And the piece of advice that I got really early on is if you find talking to people, strangers, difficult, then just ask them loads of questions because people like answering questions about themselves.
They do.
So that is my strategy for dealing with social situations where I don't feel comfortable. And now I'm really worried that I've been doing this for years, asking people questions because I do want to know the answer, not because I want to talk about myself, but because I want to have a conversation, and that's the easiest way to do it. And that they've been thinking that secretly I'm doing this. What this boomer? I don't think I'm with Marie. I don't think it's a real thing. I just don't think it's a real thing. I think that possibly the researchers involved in this, like one of them has a really, really annoying ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. And that's what I think is behind this.
God, I hope that's true. Wouldn't it be amazing to establish an entire field of study just to vent some grudge against someone you once dated? What an absolutely heroic undertaking that would be.
I think that is exactly what academia is for.
Just to follow that up, though, do you have stock questions you ask people? Do you find some work better than others?
You want to ask open-ended questions, and I think I tend to just be sort of ask people how they got into something, and that's usually a good starting point for anything else that they want to talk about.
What I really like, and I would say it doesn't always work, but it works way more often than you think. Ask the questions a 5-year-old would ask. So I feel like, and I think genuinely off the top of my head, a recent thing was I met someone who's a financial crime reporter, and there's a bit like, I have nothing to say on that. So then I was like, okay, cool. What is your favourite financial crime and your least favourite financial crime?
See, this is my attitude for interviewing someone.
And it really works. It really genuinely ask yourself, what would a 5-year-old find interesting? So either that or being like, what's the weirdest thing that's happened in your job? Or like what? And you know what? It makes people more comfortable because then you can just have a nice chat straight away.
No, there's something about those kind of like late night local radio disc jockey questions, like desperately trying to fill dead air. It's just like, what's your favourite, whatever the hell it is your subject is?
This was actually inspired entirely by a friend who somehow at some very posh event met, I can't remember, something like one of the VPs of McDonald's. And Simon was just like, I have, what do you say? And he went, and I knew this was going to be all or nothing. I went to shake his hand and I went, huge fan of the Big Mac, sir. And he was like, you know what? It worked. So, and I was like, great, I will do that as well.
Just finally on this one then, Rachel, there are subgroups apparently to boomerasking, which are ask bragging, ask complaining and ask sharing. Is this all twaddle as well?
I really think it is. I do think that if you want to rant at somebody, if there's something that's really playing on your mind, you just need to vent, the polite thing to do is to go, this thing has really been annoying me. Can I just vent at you about it for 5 minutes? And then invite invite them to vent about something that they want to vent about afterwards. So maybe I am guilty of, what is it?
Boomerasking. It's not catchy, is it?
It's not catchy at all. Maybe I am guilty of the complaining bit. But again, to go back to what Marie said at the beginning, I think that's just conversation.
Is it preferable, Marie, if people just boast, if they want to boast?
To be honest, I would genuinely enjoy that, because I think, humble brags. It really annoys me when people accuse me of humble bragging. So I'm always like, I've never been humble once in my life. Like, that's not. Bragging is fine.
It's a French attitude.
Exactly. Well, to Italy now, where brouhaha is occurring which parental surname to impose upon offspring. Italian senator and former culture minister Dario Franceschini, who may just have found himself a bit bored one recent afternoon, ventured onto social media to suggest that it should become law that Italian children take their mother's surname in order to correct a long-festering injustice and to save endless stuffing about with double-barreled surnames, which in Italy in particular can often run into several dozen syllables. This bait was predictably and ravenously swallowed by Italian conservatives, and much indignant thrashing has ensued. Rachel, where are we on this fundamentally? I will establish a benchmark by saying I simply don't care.
Well, I think that this row in Italy has all of the hallmarks of a political row invented by ChatGPT. Like, people on the left say something, people on the right, go and say that you're hating tradition and wanting to tear everything up. This one is very close to my heart, because my parents have been married for many, many, many years. My mother never changed her name. Her surname is my middle name, my sister's middle name. I didn't change my name on getting married, and that was never a conversation to have. And my husband and I don't have children. We're thinking about having children, and there is a live conversation about what surname those children will have. And my attitude is, if I am going to grow a human inside my body and risk my health and my physicality for basically the rest of my life, and your part is kind of done pretty early on, then the kid should have my name. And his attitude is, yeah, but I want it to have my name, which I just don't think, I don't think they hold equal weight.
Mari, would you care to adjudicate on this dispute in the Cunliffe household, if in fact we can call it that?
You can absolutely call it that.
It's, oh God, because I do know the husband as well, so this is quite tricky. Obviously I'm on your side. Obviously I'm entirely on your side. Have you tried? So I do have friends, and I was about to say the full name, but I don't want to dox a child live on radio. But I do have friends for their kids. They've made a mashup of their two surnames, which I think is, I think they're quite lucky in that it works. They managed to find a way that works.
There are potential twee issues there.
I think that's super adorable, but doesn't work with most surnames.
Yeah,
but it might work with most Italian surnames, because Italian surnames, they all sound pretty cool and sexy.
So my thing, which I really want to do, so I feel like I need to preface this by saying I have no interest in getting married, so it's probably not going to be a concern. But I would love the idea when it comes up of just being like, I'm fine to, Smith, like Martin Smith. If I were to meet a Martin Smith, I'm like, fine.
Martin Smith, if you're listening.
He's a lovely fellow. No, I can hook you up.
No, but we would both, my thing is that we would both have to become Le Smith. I just want to add La to whatever last name the person I'm marrying.
Have either of you ever wondered, would things have been different if you'd taken the other parent's surname?
Oh, God. Well, I've got a probably layered response to that as someone who is mixed race and second generation immigrant, because my mum has a Moroccan, obviously Muslim last name, so I think that would have been, if anything, so obviously people can't get that from my voice, but I wouldn't say I'm the most Arab looking Arab in the kind of history of North Africa, so I think people probably would have just been quite confused but by me having a Muslim surname.
I think I would have confused the immigration officials at Berlin airport even more if I had a German passport and my mother's surname, which is German. But I also think, weirdly, it would have been easier for English people to spell. I mean, my surname comes from Lancashire. It was changed by my grandfather, who wanted an English-sounding name, and it is apparently spellable only by people from Lancashire. No one from any other part of the UK is able to spell or even sort of pronounce it, really. So I think I would have had an easier time with my mum's surname, but there's family history there. There's family history there on both sides.
Is the solution to the dilemma, and I absolutely do see your argument that the woman, in terms of bringing a new life into the world, does, well, let's face it, pretty much all the work. So that does seem fair enough. But what about just picking the surname that sounds cooler?
Well, that would definitely be mine. Although I think like he would say that his goes back to I don't know, the Scottish kings that came over with William the Conqueror, or some other absolute nonsense like that. You should have him on to do his side of the argument. I'm not doing it very well.
This could run and run. We could do back and forth for weeks. Murray, just as a final thought, there is of course the idea that is often floated of the double-barreled name. Although, as I have explained, I think in Italy that would present problems. Your surname is not actually double-barreled, but it's sort of in two bits. So you're the closest we have to an expert on that. Where are you on the double-barreling thing? Because the other thing as well is like, what happens when two people who already have double-barreled surnames have a child? Does the kid cop all four, and then like a few generations down the track we've got people with 128 surnames?
I'm not sure, as I said, please, Lo was my mother's name. But, no, I'm not sure. No, I do find the double barrel thing a bit silly. And also I can remember who made the point that when you meet someone with a quite fancy sounding double barreled name, you can never tell if he's posh or woke. And you have to meet them first. But that's my main thought, really.
David Beckham's son claimed to have invented the concept of a double barreled surname.
He's not the sharpest tool in the box, though, is he?
I'm not quite sure which son it was, but said that he and his partner wanted to do something new, so they gave the baby both surnames.
That's
because he was the first person who ever thought of that before.
At which, just in closing, I will commend to our listeners to enhance the gaiety of their evening that they look up David Beckham's son's photography book and enjoy the captions. Murray LeConte and Rachel Cunliffe, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, it's time for our weekly Letter From. This week, Monocle's Chiara Ramella takes us on a tour of Senegal's capital.
Downtown Dakar is a noisy place. Senegal's capital has the kind of traffic that sneaks up on you, the sort of unexpected gridlock that turns a 10-minute journey into a 2-hour one, accompanied by its fair share of impatient beeping. And then there's the construction sounds. Tall buildings keep shooting up on these streets in a relentless expansion, so much so that truckloads of sand await on the side of many pavements to be turned into another high-rise. It's easy to forget when you're in the middle of its tight centre that this is in fact a city surrounded by nature, kissed by the sea on three sides. Jutting out of the continent on the Cape Verde Peninsula, it peeks out into the Atlantic on a little pointy tip. All you need to do is leave the grind of its residential areas behind and head to the Corniche. There, the landscape suddenly opens up, the light feels even stronger and the din a lot more subdued. I had spent the whole day walking through markets from one modernist cement tower block to the other when I decided it was time to make for the coast. But not just any bit of it. I would trace the whole outline of the city to end up in the neighbourhood of Les Almadies, up in the northwestern corner. Zooming up the seafront, my weather-beaten yellow and black taxi drove past some of Dakar's most renowned landmarks, the vast expanse of the Place du Souvenir Africain, the colossal African Renaissance monument, and the colourful, tall Mosque de la Divinité, only to arrive to the maritime suburb in little more than 20 minutes. Stepping out on the unpaved, dusty road felt like being in a different city altogether, one made of luxurious villas and bohemian beachside bar shacks with its own breezy charm. And yet, as is often the case when we find ourselves on promontories or peaks, the temptation to walk past all these establishments onwards and further to reach the very tip of this peninsula was too strong to resist, particularly because La Pointe des Almadies isn't just any spot. It is in fact the westernmost point of the whole African continent and of the Afro-Eurasian landmass, if you consider these giant bits of the earth as a whole. So I walked on, past a deserted construction site, via a checkpoint for a private beach, beyond where the official roads on the map go. It was when I was traversing the fascinating, if haunting, abandoned Club Med site that a guard stopped me in my tracks. "Is this the way for the Pointe?" I asked, slightly disoriented and incredulous that such a significant location in the world's geography could really be hiding here, with no signs, tourists, or paths to speak of. He eventually waved me on, so I traced the edge of the hotel's empty pool to arrive on the sand on the other side. All of a sudden, I could see it, the Pointe stretching into the sea, where it broke off into a constellation of dark basaltic rocks, half peeking up from the Atlantic. Shockingly, there was no one else around, only me and the waves from either side of this tongue of land crashing into each other just past the shore. I took my shoes off and gingerly walked into the water. It was cold, but not too much. Looking ahead in the afternoon haze, you could make out the outline of a small lighthouse emerging from the sea, le Chaussée des Amadis. The ocean stretching in front of me felt impossibly big, awe-inspiring and terrifying all at once. In a place like that, in a city like Dakar, it's impossible for images of the slave trade not to come rushing in. Millions of people were trafficked from the infamous island of Gorée on the other side of Dakar's peninsula, only to be forced onto boats that made the transatlantic crossing. The immensity of that number, the dreadfulness of that journey, the weight of that past felt suffocating in the blinding light. Then another realization struck me. For the half hour or so that I was sat on that rock, on the Pointe des Almadies, I was the single westernmost person in the entirety of Afro-Eurasia. Me and 6.7 billion people to the east of my body, roughly 86% of the world's entire population. Perhaps that's the reason why we cannot resist walking to the tip of whichever peninsula we find ourselves on, to the top of the mountains and hills. We long for something to remind us of how tiny but important each existence is in the face of the magnitude of history and the world beside us. I took a big breath, put my shoes on and made my way back to the city. Just one of the 6.7 billion people on this landmass of ours. For Monocle in Dakar, I am Chiara Rimella.
Thank you, Chiara. And that is all for this edition of The Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Mari Leconte and Rachel Cunliffe. Today's show was produced by Hassan Anderson and researched by Francesca Jukes. Our sound engineer was Flynn Simons. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.